Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Tobi Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. We talk about personal development, professional development, and a little bit of philosophy. And so thanks for joining us, and hopefully, you'll enjoy listening to two coaches, philosophers, trainers just having a conversation. How you doing today, Tobi?
I'm doing good. I wouldn't classify myself as a philosopher in any way, but
Oh, come on.
that's sure.
We're all philosophers to some degree. I mean, it's funny because I
Yeah,
talk about what's the difference between everyday people and philosophers, and because we all have built a philosophy over our lifetimes, we've assembled a bunch of beliefs, and the philosopher is just kind of considered the more deeply reviewed, reflected, and probably consciously committed to certain beliefs, whereas a lot of people believe stuff that they've inherited through default or whatever, become
yeah.
habits. So, come on, you're
I
a deep
guess. Yeah,
thinker.
actually, yeah. Well, when I when I was younger, it was always this joke that if you became unemployed and people are asking what you're doing, and it's like, well, I'm a part-time philosopher. That's what I do. So I
Yeah.
guess we're all some kind of philosophers, sure.
Well, I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't put on a
No, but
business
it's weird.
card.
I'm in my Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but it's a weird. I'm in a weird state because today is the first day I'm actually sort of officially back working for a month, and it's just catching up on things and trying to be organized. It takes a while to get into the rhythm and to the habits, and I'm a bit scattered today, I have to say.
Oh, well, sometimes that can lead to some of the best conversations. You get into there's not too much forethought, there's not too much resistance. You can just you're in the relaxed
Yeah,
vacation vibe. That's good. So,
exactly. Yeah.
well,
So let's
that's,
see where it takes us.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, perfect, because you've got our topic for today. So lay it on us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was lying in bed, couldn't sleep, and I was thinking about what would be interesting to talk about, and I thought about relationships well, just as a topic, relationships.
Hmm.
And I think it's interesting for, of course, every human on the planet. We're interconnected, so we're connected somehow. So relations are important, either if we want to or not. And we can probably realize that we have a lot of different kinds of relationships. With some are close, some are far. Some are important, some are less important, some are dearer or less dear to us, and just how do you manage all of this in a productive way? That's something that I would like to, well, discover a little bit, and maybe unearth some things that can help me and you and others to think about when it comes to relationships. How can we be constructive about them and to behave in the best way to make life easier for ourselves and for people around us.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most important skills to learn, because none of us is truly independent. Right? We all are
Mm,
interconnected. We all rely on each other or someone else to some degree. And there's a quote from that I read years ago from Anthony Robbins, who said, the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships. Because
mm,
I think although people may feel lonely and feel isolated, there's very few people that are completely alone, and maybe they don't have the deep, meaningful relationships they're looking for. But we're all connected to some degree, and learning to relate to other people. I mean, that's obviously the basis of the word. It is
mm,
such an important skill. I mean,
mm,
not just if you're in sales or if you're a networker or an influencer. Obviously, the nature of relationships is so important to the human experience, right?
mm. The human experience, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing, but I think that's so true. That it kind of creates the human experience to a large extent. And yeah, and I discover when we're doing workshops and different development programs that we always come back to that when you're working you're always working together with other people in some way, either if you like it, even if it's your boss or if it's customers or stakeholders or whatever. But it comes down to the as a skill, how can you nurture and establish true good relationships in an effective way? And there's a real challenge there now in the workplace. Like, how can you learn to do that quickly? I mean, of course, there are no shortcuts to relationships. So you have to invest time to create them and to develop them and to establish them. But I guess you can do so more or less effectively as well. So you can know people for years without really having a true relationship. Well, with some people it takes 10 minutes, and you feel like you have a very strong relationship. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many different ways to look at it, and different types of relationships that we have. And some people expect certain intimate relationships to last a lifetime. Rarely do they, or our family relationships tend to last longer. But we go through phases as we grow. We relate to different people in different ways, and I think this is the key thing about relationships. They are they play such a key role in how we identify. We identify mostly in relation to other people. It's the contrast that we have, and other people reflect things back to us through our relationships with them. There's an interesting quote from Hermann Hesse, great German literary figure from 100 years ago. Anyway, he's written, I think his most famous work is Steppenwolf, but Siddhartha is one that he wrote, but he's written many great classic literature. But he has a quote that that in one of his novels that kind of stuck with me. But he claims that the things we hate in others are only the things that we see in ourselves. The things that we don't have as a characteristics, we will not affect us in others. And I've been back and forth on this. I don't know if I buy into it 100%, but definitely he was onto something there, that a lot of the things that when we encounter someone else that really trigger us, that really generate some kind of emotion in us, it does reflect something back about ourselves, good or bad, right? So maybe it's that really feeling that resonance with someone. You see something of yourself in them. By the same token, if you really are put off by someone, there's something that you don't like about yourself that you see in them. This is the point he was trying to make. And I think that is true to a degree, right?
Yeah, it could be. And I'm also thinking if it could reflect, because I mean it's very complex. Where my train of thought is going is that if I'm having a relationship, or if I'm affected by a relationship with someone, that relationship will have an effect on my relationship with someone else, because I will identify and certain aspects of that relationship might reflect on another relationship. So it becomes very complex when I meet someone, and this can create a lot of conflicts as well. So if I meet someone who I think is very interesting and opens up ideas within me that I haven't discovered before, and I'm very intrigued and drawn to this relationship, and then try to explain that to someone else who hasn't met this person, that will have an effect on that relationship, and that can create conflicts in itself. I mean, and I guess that could be the source of a lot of breakups and divorces, etc. If you don't take care and nurture the original relationship and to develop that in what do you call it, in equal steps with the other one, right? Otherwise, one relation might be isolated from the other. So there's all this interconnectedness with the relationships. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is interconnected, and that's why. I mean, this is what when we work with companies. This is why it's so important to take a systemic approach, because the relationships, that's what makes organizations complex in most situations, is because anytime you put people, in the picture, it becomes complex because, you've got emotions, you've got different ways, different mindsets, different mental models, and there's so much variability. People's moods change, their state of mind in any particular moment, and these are all the variables that make relationships so complex, right? And then we have the dynamic, the male female energy dynamic, there's everything from power struggles to insecurities and people exerting their own fears on each other, and it's a fascinating thing to look at, and it's a lifelong journey of learning how do I better. I think I'm still I'm still a long way from being good at relationships, but I look back, and at least because what can you control in a relationship? You can't control the other person. All you can do is control your own choices and actions and reactions, and and try to be aware of your biases and your perceptions and so on. And so a lot of times the way we react to other people is the way we perceive a certain situation. We interpret the words, we interpret actions, and that leads to the way that we interact with other people. And so I think that's such an important thing to remember about relationships, is the only thing you have control over is yourself, to some degree. Yeah. Even that is only is not an absolute. So I think that's the first thing to remember, that whether it's personal relationships, business relationships, and I've brought up the 4 agreements many times, and one of them is don't take things personally, right? So it's learning not to care as much about what other people think, and not to take things personally in situations, whether it's in the business world or the personal world. I think that leads to healthier relationships. And until you really know yourself and you have a greater awareness of yourself, I don't think, I think relationships will always be a struggle until you recognize the way that you are interacting with other people. And it comes down to the roles, right? We've talked about roles and identity, and so we depending on the relationship we have, the person we're relating to, we enter a certain role, right? We participate in a certain way. It brings out certain characteristics in us.
Yeah, and kind of expectations, right? So if we have different expectations on each other in different types of relationships, how do you prioritize that then? That become a real struggle. That can be, that is difficult, I think, for most for most of us, and that makes it so complex. How should I, if I have these people together, how should I behave to each and one of them? If you don't feel like you can be really truly authentic in every situation, and you have different kind of expectations that doesn't match up, then you're gonna have problems, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's that's where a lot of our conflicts come from, and it's actually this goes back to an old psychologist from the time of Freud, Alfred Adler, and he's got a lot of interesting ideas, some that are probably very controversial, like he didn't believe there was such a thing as trauma. But certainly he felt like we all have our, like if you drew these 2 circles, we have our tasks, the things that we're trying to get done, and other people have their tasks, and where they overlap, there's this conflict of interest, and that's where a lot of our human conflicts come from. The things we want, the things intentions we have, the ideas about the way the world should be, and that's where a great deal of our conflict comes from in life, is the interpersonal stuff that's happening, right?
Yeah, sure. So what can we do about it? That's maybe the core of the conversation. So how can we nurture more healthy, constructive, good relationships? What do you do, or what do you think about?
Well, I'd say good communication is one big piece of it, but I don't think I think communication is probably a topic we'll do a whole podcast on. But
Or
learning
a few, yeah.
yeah, or a few. I mean, I would point to Rosenberg's model of nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
And Marshall B. Rosenberg, he has a book, Nonviolent Communication. There's a whole community on that. That's a really important one. But I'd say, and another great resource for personal relationships is Esther Perel. I think she's amazing. There's a lot of talks online about her. But I think, again, for me, the most important thing to have good relationships is to get to know yourself better. So, there's the old saying, no one else can love you unless you love yourself. Well, that's part of this whole process of, becoming more self-aware, recognizing what you're putting out into the world, whether it's, your actions or the words or your responses to other people. I think the way to improve the quality of your relationships is to recognize what's happening within you and what that impact that is happening on other people, because that's where you can start to change the way relationships happen. And I think when I look at now the things in my personal relationship that I have, where I know that I would have responded differently or reacted or I would have been triggered to do this. And I'm happy to see that those are no longer at play because I've worked on them, enough. Even relationships. Think about the way your relationships within family develop over the years. Maybe it's between you and your wife, between you and your kids, but what about your parents, right? I think about the relationship that I had with my mom in my 20s is so much different than now. It took a long time for me to. I grown up doing lots of things, lots of experiences, and then all of a sudden my mom phones me and I turn into a teenage boy again or a little kid or whatever. Yeah. It's funny the what interaction with certain people will do to us, and so I think that level of awareness about what's it doing to you, I think, is the first step, and that's how we have better. More successful relationships. I've been through a divorce, and I've been through the not consciously blaming, trying to think I'm very neutral and very objective, but at the end of the day, when a relationship has followed a major conflict or completely falls apart, and you see how you're blaming the other person for things. That's the opposite of what you need to be doing. And it was only after the fact that I could reflect on, I can see the role I played in this and that and all these situations I didn't like. And if you look at the relationships you have, both professionally and personally, and you look at the things you don't like about a person, or you try and figure out why is it always so difficult, and you see yourself placing blame or passing judgment rather than going, okay, what have I done to contribute to that? Or how am I letting that? Because people go, you hear people say things like, you made me do that, or you made me feel this way. And I want to say to those people, really? Other people have so much power over you that they can control your emotions and your reactions and your responses? Really? Are you giving that power to other people? And this is the thing, when we make people responsible for what we feel and how we act, then we become a victim, and a victim is not in a position of power to respond and react, right?
I guess I talk about that outcome creative state quite a lot when we take personal responsibility for our own actions and the outcome of the results, etc. But and it's easy to say, but difficult to do, obviously. But
yeah, for sure. Even for me.
I also, no, but it's because this is something that maybe we all struggle with. And when you were talking, I'm also thinking about that in a professional environment. At least the organizations that I'm working with, it's very common that you actually take an active approach to proactively work with relationships, like because you have a common goal, hopefully, in most working environments, and you have to have discussions, how are we working together, what can we improve, what do you need from each other, and just get to know each other, build relationships like that. And usually I think it's a very positive experience for most people, and people find it's constructive and helpful. But how, and maybe if you're in a family, you're so close to each other, so you have, with your wife or spouse or husband or whatever it is, you're so close to each other, so and obviously you have a common goal to develop your family or whatever it is, create a common life together. So you'll have conflicts and conflict resolutions, and you'll have constructive debates about things, and you'll probably talk about the sort of status of your relationship from time to time. But with friends, I at least for me, I never talk about this with my friends, like with my just random social environment. I never have conversations with my friends about how can we develop our relationships further? What do you need from me? It's kind of just taken for granted that with really close friends that you should just be there when it's needed. But you never have these process talks about it, and I think that's quite interesting. And of course, it depends on what kind of friendship you have. But I think it's interesting that it's just taken for granted. And what does that tell you about your friends and your friendship? Like what do you expect from them, and what can they expect from you? And it might look very different, but I think it's very rare that you actually have these kind of, if we call them process conversations about relations in that stratosphere with your friends.
Yeah, I think in friendships there tends to be a little less pressure and less expectations. I think, and there's also some distance because you're not constantly. I guess there are friends who see each other every day, but I'm trying to think of the philosopher. I think it was Epicurus who I think. I hope I'm picking the right philosopher here. I'm drawing a bit of a blank, but who believed that he had some theories about happiness, and he ended up getting in his older years he ended up getting a house and invited his friends to live there. Everybody had their own, and I think that was sort of the first commune type of but he really believed in the best relationships you have are your friendships. They're not as fraught with the drama of romantic relationships or political relationships. And so he had a lot of he had a lot of emphasis on the importance of these friendships. For some reason I think I've got the wrong philosopher, but anyway, I will correct myself the next podcast because it's just not coming to me. Sure. Or maybe by the end of our conversation it will.
It doesn't. No, but maybe that's it. That you don't have to have those kind of expectations. There's no, if you don't succeed in your friendship, it's not going to matter, right? You have the opportunity to become or not hang out whenever you want. But if it's your husband or if it's your boss, you don't really have that kind of opportunity, right?
There are more obligations.
It's a very different kind of energy to that kind of relationship.
Yeah, and I think for me, because of the fact that I live so far from where I grew up, and I have friendships here, but I think the friends you make in your 30s and beyond maybe are different than the ones you made in your teens and your 20s. But certainly the people who keep in touch with me despite the geography, I think that those are some of the best relationships, because there are literally people who I won't see for 4 or 5 years, and then when we see each other, it's like no time has passed, and we just pick up where we left off. And those are, for me, really worthwhile quality relationships. But there are people I see more often who I also, I enjoy and I sometimes, I'm sad about the fact that I'm so busy and I don't have the time for everyone. But I find the older I get, the more introspective and the more satisfied I am to have sort of my own space and not need to, as a teenager or a young man, I just constantly needed that contact with others. And if you think about this what I was saying before about this is our vehicle for figuring out who we are, and relationships are one of the most important vehicles for growth, right? On whatever type of relationship you're talking about. And I think maybe that's why. Maybe I find more of my growth through introspection now than I do through the interacting with others. That's just thought that I'm pulling out of the air, but I'm just reflecting on it now. But I think that some people are more extroverted and they need that social interaction more, and some people are more introverted and they take their energy from having more space from other people. Or in lower energy environments. So yeah, I think the type of relationship and the environment. But the thing I sometimes come back to when I think about what makes good relationships, and the Patrick Lencioni model, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? I think they could just as easily be at least in part transferable to relationships, because the model says that the foundation for the most, he puts it in terms of the dysfunctions, but so the biggest dysfunction is an absence of trust. So the kind of trust he talks about is vulnerability, and vulnerability is something that's really important in relationships, right? How can you really trust? And so it's not the kind of trust, I trust that you won't steal from me or you won't lie to me or whatever, that may or may not be there, but this ability to be vulnerable, right? To expose yourself on a level where, to show who you really are, to be authentic, to let people see some of your emotions. I mean, in the business setting, we talk about it in terms of, admitting that you've made a mistake or admitting that you don't know something. That's sort of the professional vulnerability. But in personal relationships, letting people see your emotions, right? Letting people know how you're feeling when you're having a moment of weakness and that sort of thing, and being able to laugh recklessly or shed a tear or whatever. So that level of vulnerability. And I think that, and then so the next level of the pyramid of the model, it's a fear of conflict. And this one I can so relate to, because in the 10 years of my marriage, we never fought until the last little, the last sort of 1.5 to 2 years. And I think that when you look at relationships where you have a good culture of conflict, healthy conflict, you're able to argue and you're able to sort it out and then move on. I think those lead to the best relationships, because you're not afraid to say what's on your mind, and that the other person, you're going to get beyond it and resolve it, right? And so you're willing to put stuff on the table without worrying about what the other person's going to think about you, how you're going to be judged, and so on. So having that trust, that commitment, and then from there, his pyramid, he talks about commitment and accountability and results. But if you at the level of commitment, so if you don't have the trust, you're not willing to have those conflicts, then by the time you get to that level of commitment, then what happens in companies is, people will develop their own agendas. They'll go, whatever. I mean, I know we talked about this, but I'm not in personal relationships, these decisions that you don't share with your partner, and you just go off and do it, right? I mean, though you're not committed to what was agreed, or you change plans without or whatever, right? It can be applicable to both, but then you start to develop your own agenda that's not in line, because what brings a team together? And I think in relationships, that's one of the most important teams you can have, right? It's one thing I really value about my current relationship. I really feel like we're a team, right? And so what is a team? It's people with a common goal, right? It's a group of people, 2 or more, with a common goal, something they're both working towards. And so if people have, divergent agendas, then that's going to be a problem. And then especially when it comes to accountability, and this is something in personal relationships, when you're blaming each other and you blame other people for how you feel, or when things go wrong, you blame your partner. They're the easiest one, because you blame them for everything, because you count on them not leaving you for being being an idiot that way. I know, I've done it. And then you look at the results, and you, like the iceberg model, all you see is the results. You see this is going wrong, this is dissatisfactory, and so on. You see these results, but you don't look at, where's my accountability? Am I really committed? Are we committed to the same things? Are we able to have this conflict? And if not, then, why is that? Where's the trust, right? And so I think that model...
What if we disagree?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that model is equally applicable to relationships. And so, sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit about Lencioni's model.
No, but it's an essential part of it. I mean, because we're talking about trust, you're talking about conflicts as a foundation for building or for getting to accountability in the end results. But if you don't have the foundation there of the relationships, and I mean, if you look at self-determination theory, relatedness is one of it's autonomy, competency, and relatedness.
Yeah.
And it seems like when I'm working with teams, that relatedness is the major part. That's where you can really work on something. You can control it. You can't control it, but you can manage it. You can proactively do something about it.
Yeah.
So thinking about, okay, what kind of energy do I want to put into different kind of relationships? How much am I willing to open myself to contribute to this relationship? How important is it to me? And something that I really recommend as a thing to do, that I'm kind of forced to do once in a while, because we do it with the participants in one of the programs that I run, but it's kind of a network survey or a network mapping. So we're talking about networks, which is very much related to your relationships, and just thinking about in different kind of areas. So your professional field, your social area, what is it more? Sort of family, friends, your professional, so professional, but not maybe in your organization. So as a coach, for instance, I mean, what kind of relationships we have in ICF, or International Coaching Federation, or just in the industry sort of thing, right? So just thinking about what are the networks or relationships that I have, and what are the ones that I would like to develop further, and just doing that kind of mapping once in a while. It just really gives you an idea of, I haven't talked to this person for a long time, and that person is really, really important to me. I like him or her, or I can contribute in some way, they can contribute. So, and just getting an overview of, okay, what does it look like right now? It's kind of, you remember before we talked about doing your yearly vision board, right? What do you want to establish? But this just gives you an overview of what are some relationships that you're having, and maybe you realize that, for instance, because I have a similar situation, like my good old friend in New Zealand that is really close to me. I haven't spoken to him for 2 weeks. It's about due to make a phone call, right? And then you do that, and it's just like it used to be. But just because it takes a little bit of an effort, right, to actually manage them and to maintain them and keep them, and it's so worthwhile. I mean, just thinking about every time you do that, when you call someone up out of the blue, and we haven't spoken for a while. It's so fun. It's such a fulfilling thing.
Yeah, and that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's another point I wanted to make about we talk about these things that you can do, but it's not easy. I mean, human relationships can be difficult, and it's I guess I hate to put it as work, but it does take some work to make it work out. It takes some work. We have this, I think some people have this fallacy or this false belief that when I find the right person, or if I surround myself with the right person, it'll just be easy. It'll just flow. And that's just not the case. I mean, we all have our good and bad days. We all have misunderstandings. And if your relationships are so superficial that you have no conflicts, and then I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have friends or intimate relationship with people who are like a clone of me. I like having that kind of contrast, people with a difference of opinion and so on. Obviously, you want things that you have in common, that you can, points where you can connect. But at the end of the day, you just want to have people that, you respect them, they respect you. You want a certain degree of kindness and consideration, the things that facilitate that trust so that you can be vulnerable, right? So, and all of those things take some awareness, some reflection, and practicing some good habits. I mean, the things, think about, we learn a lot of our etiquette about how to interact with people as we were kids. We learn social norms about, these unwritten rules about the way, and that becomes, part of your culture, and that will change in different parts of the world, depending on where you are. But then even being sensitive to that when you're meeting people that come from a different mindset or different culture or different socioeconomic status, and they'll all have different ways that they've learned over time, and sometimes some of those habits need to be changed in order to have healthy relationships, especially people who grew up in abusive relationships or just or tough neighborhoods, and in order to adjust and to have more harmonious relationships, you need that. But I think it's this going back to this desire to have harmonious relationships. I don't think it's possible to always have that, and I think this combination of, like, I've said that a good relationship is a combination of support and giving support and challenging, right? So with friendships, you want to hold each other accountable. With teams, you want people that trust each other enough and are open enough to challenge each other, but also support each other, right? So it's that combination of, well, I'm going to push you a little bit, but I'm also going to support you, right? And I think those make really quality, good quality relationships in my view.
Yeah. For me, I think you can have a lot of different kinds of qualitative relationships that serve different purposes. I mean, I've friends and colleagues that are great, that I enjoy and appreciate in different ways, but they all sort of fulfill some kind of my needs, and hopefully I can cater to their needs as well. But it's never the same. I know some are maybe more filled with not conflict, but with different kind of viewpoints and discussions, and some are just laughter, and that can be great as well. But I think it's what you mentioned, I think, is also a really important part of relationships, thinking of the downside and the negative parts of some relationships when you're actually having a destructive relationship, how, and just first of all realizing what a detrimental effect that can have on your health and your well-being overall, and sometimes what it takes to get out of that, because if it's I would say that some relationships are definitely not worth having if it's only draining energy, and if I know that Keegan talks about this, that when in adult development, that if we want to develop further, that might need to lead to some conflict where you have to break some relationships because you're being pulled down, or you're not seeing the world in the same kind of view, and just not. I'm not saying sort of destroying relationships, but moving on. Yeah, I'm not in any way saying that we should leave our friends behind or our spouses behind and move on, but in certain situations it might be the case that that's the best thing to do.
Absolutely, right. I totally think that's the case. I think that if you look back on your life and you look at the different, I think back as the friends that I had maybe for just a couple of years, and we had some great times, and then I wonder, what happened to that? But it was just a phase of my life, right? And now to go back, would I still be able to be friends with? Would we still be friends? Would we still have enough points to relate to each other? I think there's nothing wrong with having some people that are with you for a lifetime or for a longer period, or some people that just accompany you through a shorter period, and those can be good and bad or neutral. But I think that there's no that doesn't define the quality of the relationships that you have with people, right? I think just because they're not as long lasting, and this was some, sorry if I keep getting personal here, but this, one of the things about at the end of a marriage, it feels like a failure, and so that was a big disappointment, and it felt like a big failure, and now when I reflect on it, there was a lot of really good times, and it was the ideal relationship for the time period that I was in it, and then and maybe even overstretched the limits of it, and tried to drag it on because of the commitment that was made. And I like what Wayne Dyer says about the fact that relationships out of obligation lack dignity. These relationships that we have, I think when you're doing things out of obligation, I try and make sure that the things that I'm doing, whether it's for friends, relatives, people that are close to me, I do it because that I want to be doing it. There's a level of affection there. There's love behind it, and not just this. I feel an obligation. I don't think that's a very authentic way to live life, and so I think that makes a big difference in the type of relationships that you have. When someone comes to you for help in the workplace or as a friend or whatever, I think if the genuine desire to help someone rather than, oh, well, I've been asked, so I guess I'm obligated. I think that's obligation is it's just such a negative way to interact with relationships. And I think putting that negative pressure, because you're afraid of what other people think of you, or these reciprocal relationships where it's always give and take. Well, now it's your turn or it's my turn, and I'm going to do this, and I expect something from you in return. And I think that those are shallow relationships. Don't have the depth of connection that we really are searching for in the world. So I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think about myself, if I can be a bit personal as well. I mean, just growing up, I as a kid, sometimes it was difficult for me to say no. I had a lot of different kinds of friends and different groups and stuff, and I've always been a little bit of a too much of a kind person. So sometimes it's difficult to say no, and that got me into some really internal struggles, because it ended up for me not really having relationships, but spending my time and having, like, hanging out with people that I didn't want to at the time, really, if I looked to what I truly wanted myself. I mean, there's no to a degree this was fine, but I think many of us can relate to that, and in some way, that sometimes it's difficult to say no. And sometimes you can feel like a relationship is a little bit just drawing a little bit too much energy, and there are expectations there that you don't want to commit to. And just reflecting on that and think about what am I into right now, and how can I manage this in the best situation. And for me now, it's of course it's much more simple. I just be a little bit frank, or just you can. With technology, it's also easier to see who's calling and not answering the phone, or whatever it is.
Well, we get a lot more self-confident, and we get less as we get older. Hopefully, we get less worried about what other people think of us. But I can totally relate to what you're saying, because I really, especially in my really close relationships, I have this need for harmony, and that's not always good, because then you avoid conflicts. And as I just went through in the model there, avoiding conflicts is not a good. It's not a good way to have relationships. You need to be able to get stuff out there. But for me, it's as a kid growing up, there was not an encouragement to have debate. There was a somewhat of an authoritarian vibe. Respect your elders, and they have the last say. Don't talk back. And I can't say one-to-one that's where it comes from, but it established a pattern. And I think sometimes in certain situations, especially where there's very close relationships, I'll find myself defaulting to that, avoiding conflict. It's obviously a fear response, because, with fear, you have your fight, flight, or freeze response. And sometimes, depending on the situation. And it's funny, because in business and work, I'm very diplomatic, coming from my Canadian heritage. I'm very diplomatic, but and I'm polite, but I'm able to negotiate. I'm able to discuss things and get, obviously otherwise I wouldn't be a very good coach. I wouldn't have done very well in business. But in personal relationships, sometimes I'll trigger that, that inner child maybe, or, that pattern from my youth where I just desired harmony. I just wanted, can't we just all get along? And so we'll revert to these patterns. And this comes again back to, the status of our relationship, or the nature, or the way people interact with us. It is in large part due to ourselves, what we're putting out there, how we are reacting to people. And so I think that's important to recognize and to reflect on. What do other people bring out in me? And I think to think about, being selective about the friends and the personal relationships. Obviously, you can't so much pick your coworkers or whatever, or some other situations, but you can choose the people you closest to, that you surround yourself with. And I encourage people to, surround themselves with people who bring out the best in them. So you know how some people they will bring out bad habits, or they'll pull you in a direction that you don't really want to be in, because it's an old pattern or whatever. And I think when you surround yourself with people that bring out the best in you, spend more time with them, because that lifts your energy and theirs. So I think that's a really helpful one for personal relationships.
Yeah, that's great. Now, relating to that, and as an introvert, and you talked about the difference between introverts and extroverts in terms of relationships, and I can totally relate to that it's more about quality for me, and not so much about quantity, perhaps. However, and I don't like networking, and I don't like being at a networking event and trying sort of forceful to create new relationships. However, of course, it's important, and it's a great source of energy when you feel like you can expand your relationships and meet new people and get new perspectives on things and widen the palette in different directions. So being curious about people and creating relationships in that way, it's something that we can all think about more, and how can we do it more proactively. And for me, it's very much about just trying new things. I'm interested in people. I'm not very good at networking, as I said, but if I'm putting myself out to try new things, I will meet new people, and I will kind of create relationships through that. So that's another sort of maybe indirect approach to create relationships as well. That can be, you never know what it's going to lead to, but you can meet some wonderful people in all different kind of settings, which is great.
Yeah, and I think
and also another thought that I just triggered. It was actually my wife. We watched some kind of show, and they were talking about loneliness, and she out of the blue asked me do you feel lonely sometime? And I was like, yeah, I feel lonely sometimes, but I can enjoy it. I can really enjoy my loneliness, and it made me think of you mentioned a lot of quotes already, but there's a Swedish author called Göran Tunström. He wrote in one book that loneliness is the world's biggest community. So sometimes when you're feeling a little bit alone, there's a lot of people out there that you're kind of connected to somehow anyway, and I find a lot of comfort in that somehow.
It's funny, I don't get lonely. I can't remember the last time. I enjoy being alone, I think, because I spend a lot of time in my head, but and I really love spending time with select people. I like smaller groups rather than the big, so I think we're similar that way, and I like connecting with people, but I also enjoy my own time, my time to pull back and reflect. And I can't remember the last time that I've felt lonely, right? Even long periods of being single. I don't know. I guess I'm odd that way. But I've heard lots of different quotes or sayings about loneliness has to do with not being comfortable being with yourself, or but I think that everybody has different needs, and some people need that regular connection and some people don't. So I wouldn't like to pass any judgment.
No.
Before, I've talked about even me, it's difficult for me too, because it's funny because I think about, I've been working on, I've been consciously on this personal development path for over 25 years. And I think, and then there's still things I get wrong, even though I've been working on them for so long. So I think it's important to have patience with yourself, and and continue to practice good habits of relationships, because it is the most important part of life. So that's the loneliness piece. And as you were talking there, I had another thought, and it's escaped me. I need to write these down as they come up. Look, I think we've already covered a lot of ground where I was hoping to give people a few more tips. But I think, look, the Lencioni model we talked about, that's applicable to relationships as well. I think I think this is an important thing to talk about in relationships, because we often look at relationships in terms of what we get out of them. I find it interesting when people talk about, well, I've invested so much time in this relationship, and it's like, you've invested? What were you expecting to get out of it, right? And I think,
I mean, how do you define invest? It doesn't have to be something that
it's time, right? People's time is a very precious thing, but it's the investment. You had an experience, and it had an outcome, whether you liked it or not. I think that it's also important not to think about. I think it's valid to say, these are the qualities I want in the people I'm having relationships with, in my friendships and my personal romantic relationships, and even colleagues. These are the expectations that I have of other people. I think that's fair, as long as you're also willing to say, this is what I have to offer. This is what I'm willing to put into a relationship. This is what I have to give of myself. I think that a lot of people look at what they're getting, what they want to receive, and not enough about what they're trying to give, what they're trying to contribute, what they're trying to create. I mean, relationships are exercise in co-creation, right? I think that's another really important thing for people to reflect on when they're trying to improve the quality of their relationships on every level.
Yeah. What can you do to be a good friend? I think that's an interesting question. I mean, just to ask yourself, like, so it doesn't matter what kind of relationship you are in, but if you are, what can you do to be a good friend in this relationship? I mean, that's about how can you contribute? How can you be more supportive? How can you be there when these, and then it's not about, what can I get back? It's much more about what can I do?
And doing those things without expectations of reciprocation. I think when you look at what have you got to give, and not everybody's got the capacity to give back, right? I mean, when you're altruistic and you're trying to help others, they've got, maybe they don't have anything to give back in kind, but the experience in itself is what gives it back to you, right? The experience of being kind to others, the experience of being honest, being truthful. And I think that's another thing. When we live in such a culture where it's just second nature to lie, to be dishonest, and I think that you're doing your own self a disservice. I think it was the movie Liam Neeson in Rob Roy. He was giving a little lecture to his son, and he said, "Honor is a gift that you give yourself." I'm not going to try the Scottish accent, even though Liam Neeson's Irish, but he did this in his Scottish accent. Honor is a gift you give yourself, and I think the thing, if you're being the best person you can be and you're giving that to other people, regardless of what you get back, that experience in itself has immense value. And if you can look at relationships not as a transaction, so whether it's at work, whether it's in friendships or any kind of relationships, I think this, even with strangers, right? So if you're putting your best self out there, whatever comes back, the experience of that interaction will always have some value. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, it sounds like it promotes more authentic, truthful kind of relationships as well.
Yeah. And
Just another thing that I just thought about why it's so important as well. I mean, so we're obviously, I think we're covered a lot of ground on why relationships are important, and I think we've also mentioned these kind of interviews they've done with people that are very close to passing on, and a very what they typically regret is like, I didn't spend more time with my friends, with my family, and that's also looking back at your relationships. What sticks with you at the end. It doesn't matter how many cars you have. What about your relationships? Who are your true friends? Who are people that you really care about?
Yeah, it's not how many hours that you worked or anything like that. There was a book written by a nurse, The Five Regrets of the Biggest Regrets of the Dying.
Yeah,
and
that's it. Yeah.
Not having spent enough time with the people we love, right? Or the arguments we have, or the people we didn't forgive. I think those are. I haven't read the book, unfortunately, but I think those are the things that we are disappointed in ourselves when we don't let go of the past. And actually, that's one last thing I want to say, because I think we've covered a lot. But this whole thing about forgiveness and the in relationships where we hold things against people, and we kind of feel like, no, if I forgive them, I'm letting them off the hook. But at the end of the day, and you can see this in philosophies from the beginning of time that know this, and yet we still don't practice it. But we hold grudges against people, or we hold people, we aren't willing to forgive them, and then that's a toxicity in ourselves. If we're not willing to let go, when you forgive someone, you're not doing it for that person, you're doing it for yourself, because you're letting go of whatever bad thing was done to you, or whatever offense that you took, and I think that's a really important thing in relationships, to remember that forgiving people, being really, I don't want to say let people off the hook, but I think having some empathy, some patience, that people are just doing the best they can with what they know how to do, and maybe it's not as good as you can be, or it's not at your level of expectations. But and this goes to people who blame their parents or blame people from their past. For the most part, they were just doing the best they could with what the circumstances and the knowledge and the experience that they had. And sometimes people have tough periods and they should know better, right? But at the end of the day, that's who they were at that time. And I think when you can, doesn't mean you have to accept it or condone it, but you can forgive it and let it go, right? I think that's such an important piece of relationships, because that then helps you move on in your current relationships and not bring those traumas and conflicts with you. Yeah, that sounds like a great place to wrap up. Or do you have something else you want to add to that?
No, just letting go to let come, right? That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. So
yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Okay, look, I think we've rambled on. I know I rambled on a little bit about all kinds of things to do with relationships. It's such an interesting topic, and there's a lot of complexity there. But for everyone listening, look, take the time to reflect on yourself and figure out what you're giving to relationships, and value the people that are closest to you. I mean, those experiences of interacting with people. Oh, I just remember what else I wanted to talk about. Diversity. Diversity is a really interesting, it's a buzzword that we all use now. But the thing that I value most about the life that I've lived, and the ability that I've had to travel, and the fact that I grew up in a city, Vancouver, Canada, that's so diverse, and I've had such not only people of ethnic backgrounds, but people of different opinions and ways of seeing the world, and then being able to travel. And that's the one thing I love about travel, is not only you meet other travelers who share their experiences, but you go into different cultures and you get different perspectives, and that diversity of experience and the opinions that I've been, and look, some of them were shocking, and some of them I certainly do not agree with, but that has enriched my life more than anything else. Those, whether it's the close relationships or those brief encounters with people, And the diversity of all of that, I think, has made my life so much richer. And I'm super grateful for that. So, yeah.
No, I think we did talk about that indirectly, but I mean, with my background and how, I could not agree more how how important and how fulfilling it is to being able to identify with different kind of people, different cultures, different languages, and it's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, so I think don't get it
enriching, I would say.
Yeah, like anything in life, get out of your comfort zone. Don't just surround people who think what you do and look like you do and do exactly what you do. I think that is what that's very isolating, and that's very it's segregating because you tend to just get so stuck in your ways, and you see the world through one particular lens, and that's a very shallow kind of a restricted way to live your life. And anyway, so I encourage people to, if everybody in your circle of friends looks like you, talks like you, acts like you, I encourage you to branch out and reach out to someone that you might not normally talk to or interact with, and see how the experience is, So, great.
That's a good recommendation.
Tobi, look at us, It's not like you and I just only hang out with bald people who like philosophy. So, okay, look, let's leave it there. We're getting crazy now. Thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. Tobi, thanks again for the conversation. What a great topic. I'm sure over if we had an evening together, we could delve into this even deeper. But yeah, thanks for those who've had the patience to listen to our meandering conversation here. I've had a good time, and I hope it's added some value for others.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So 2 weeks we'll have another podcast up for you. Another new topic. I've already got one in mind, Tobi. With that in mind, hope you're enjoying your summer. And if you're listening to this during your summer, which I think we're dropping it in the summer anyway, we're posting it. Have a great whatever you're doing in life, and reach out to other people. Make the most of your relationships. It's what makes a fulfilling life. So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.